It's the AskJP podcast with jpmorrell. Now, let's start the show. Here's JP.
Welcome to the AskJP podcast. I'm your host, former legislator, current council member, and increasingly Gen X curmudgeon, JP. I'm joined by my co-host, Monet, political consultant, communications director, and a Zoomer first-time homebuyer. For those of you new to the show, this is a space where we tackle and discuss the important topics of the day. Though as of late, it's becoming more of a venue to discuss the things that keep you up at night or make you want to rage quit society. In that vein, we're going to discuss the state of women's rights in Louisiana, or lack thereof. We're going to chat about what happened in these last few legislative sessions, with a specific focus on reproductive rights and healthcare. We're extremely lucky today to have two great guests on this important topic, Representative Mandie Landry and Michelle Erenberg, Executive Director of Lift Louisiana. These two women have returned from the trenches to inform us regarding what's been going on in Baton Rouge, as well as the aftermath. Are we preparing to gear up for a potential constitutional convention, special sessions, or whatever other nonsense is being planned in our capital? So without further ado, let's get into it. All right. Thank you for being here, ladies. This has been a very interesting time in the state of Louisiana. I think a good place to start, Monet, unless I'm wrong, let's talk about that Presley bill, because that thing is kind of insane. Representative Landry, why don't you kind of give us the, I don't know, your experience dealing with the giant Trojan horse that was Senator Presley's bill.
Yeah, and I think I probably speak for me, Michelle, and Ellie, but that was the maddest I've been in the 5 regular sessions because of the severity and them just, shaking their head and nobody caring about the absolute insult and abuse of the process except for us. I remember talking to Michelle about his bill. And by the way, I considered him a friend no longer before a session. And we're like, this looks okay, but, little flags and, something terrible happened to his sister in Texas. And he just wanted to make sure if it happened here, it would have a higher sentence. So, okay. And then the switcheroo, the bad faith, the massive change that happened on the House side, and it wasn't even a change. I mean, this is a dual object bill that we're not going to win on, according to Ellie. I mean, they introduced not an amendment, but a whole new bill to a prior bill to take a medication and make it Schedule 4. So that happened. We didn't really realize what was happening until, I don't think, Michelle, y'all actually saw the amendment, right? Until after the committee meeting. I mean, to introduce an amendment at the beginning that is so substantive is so insulting to the process. And so by that time, the train had way left the station, flew off the House floor, even though I think I did a germane objection or dual object. I tried to amend it to take it off. I think just opposed it. I think there were several other amendments. Everyone who opposed it was pretty much Orleans delegation, a few others. And when I say the train had left the station, the day after it passed the House, it was on the Senate calendar. And JP, you were a senator, and I know your rules are different. I did not realize that a bill could go from House floor to Senate floor in 24 hours.
That is virtually unheard of. Theoretically, it's possible. Theoretically, I can get to Baton Rouge in 50 minutes. But I would have to break every law and the rules of time to do so. So, I mean, theoretically, it's possible. That kind of tells you about kind of the very specific intent of a lot of parties involved, because you have to pretty much bend every rule possible for that to happen. I mean, that is nigh impossible. And that is very indicative of they were concerned that enough press or media might actually start to articulate to the public what they were doing, to get to a point where they didn't want senators to start getting those calls and those emails and the op-eds, which typically at that point it should have taken 2-3 days. I mean, it literally leapfrogged probably half the agenda that day to get voted on. So, I mean, it was just I mean, just as a former legislator, like back here, like first I heard the amendment happen, and then it's so interesting because Mandy, I was working with some legislators on bills this year, and the House has very specific rules on amendments, like how long you have
Yes,
to put it out,
they
how it
were
has to be
picking these this
socialized to
year.
everyone. And
Hmm.
so like I was working with Jason on some bills. He's like, no, 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 I gotta have this amendment on Monday for a Wednesday meeting. And I was like, God damn, this is pretty
Hmm.
robust. Then there's this substitute bill that happens like in committee. And it was just from the outside looking in, it was just that's why I called it a Trojan horse, because for this to have been orchestrated the way it was, it must have been the intent the whole time.
Maybe. Um, Huge abusive process. And for people watching what you referred to, it's not a rule. And I got them to admit this on the floor. It's not an actual rule that you have to provide an amendment to the committee 24 hours in advance, but it's a strong practice that usually we don't do. And if something like that happens when you have a very substantive amendment, usually we just push it a week. This I don't know if it was this idea was there the whole time. I think Right to Life, who are evil, manipulative, lying, horrible people. I think they saw Thomas's bill maybe after it went through the Senate and started thinking and maybe got a little creative, maybe because when you see it on the video, it was definitely the chair was in on the conspiracy. I mean, obviously she got it. She's like, okay, and I think we have a set of amendments, no opposition. Okay, we accept them like literally this fast. And they weren't posted online. So I don't think it was from the beginning. I don't know. What do you think, Michelle?
I'm not sure. We are hoping to get to the bottom of that. There's some, creative records requests, but uh, it definitely is true that this was a huge abusive process. And I was in the committee that day. And when they said they had an amendment, I immediately pulled up the legislative website and it wasn't there. And I kept refreshing the page and refreshing the page. And then
Mhm.
when it finally posted, they had already it posted and literally they voted to approve the amendment a minute later and then voted the entire
Mhm.
bill out of the committee 15 minutes after that. So there really was no time for us to digest what the implications of that amendment were and come to the table prepared to talk about what an extreme proposal this was to schedule two medications that are not dangerous substances. They are not, abused. They have no ability for anyone to become physically or psychologically dependent on them. All of the criteria that is required to add drugs to the schedule, these medications didn't meet any of that. And so there was no time for medical providers to weigh in, which is why I think it was so important that almost 300 of them quickly mobilized within 72 hours to sign on to a letter to Presley saying, this is crazy.
Well, I mean, I guess to that point, I guess I concede, Mandy. I don't think necessarily Thomas was in on it, but I
Right.
just Right to Life is so sinister. And I'll give you like
Mhm. Good
Michelle.
word, sinister.
Yeah, Michelle and I have had these exchanges with him, but like Ben Clapper and I have got into it on numerous occasions. And at one point, he and I was arguing on the floor against a bill, and I literally said, "They're coming after your birth control." Like I put it out there. This was like
Oh yeah.
maybe like
Oh yeah.
2016. And Ben came to me on the rail and lost his shit. He was like, "Do not say that. We're not going after birth control." And I was like, "Ben, everything you're doing is like a straight line to birth control. Like you
Yeah.
keep saying like I'm just nibbling around the edges, and like the edges are going to birth control and probably IUDs too, or everything. I mean, it's like pretty terrifying. And when I saw this, I was like, that son of a bitch is like we're getting one step closer to birth control. Like what was saying, this one step closer to saying we're gonna fully interfere in every relationship women can have with their medical providers, with their family, with their own like body and determination. But like everything's a step closer. And when you saw how quickly and viciously the moment that thing passed, they went around taking credit for it, that's when I was just like, this, it just, to your point, I'll concede, probably Thomas, because Thomas's story was a very compelling story, and he was very
Mhm.
emotional about it whenever he did a presentation on it. But I can't believe for a second that right to life was not like the moment that bill was filed was like, yep, this is going to be the way we're going to get that thing that we've been trying to get, but we could never quite get. I mean, whenever they
Mhm.
talked about the idea of this, I'm sure a variety of people from different socioeconomic and political backgrounds would have been opposed to it. But to find a bill right at the cusp of the end of the process where you could just ambush it and waylay it and get it passed that quickly, I mean, it is just, it's heartbreaking. But I mean,
Yeah. And I do think, I mean, I think there's something to this because there were a lot of other elements to that bill, even as introduced, that were not relevant at all to what Presley was trying to do. So, one of the things that the bill also did, even before it was amended, was to add the abortion medication ban to the racketeering statute. So that if someone were mailing or distributing medication used for abortions in violation of that law, that there also could be sort of an investigation on this kind of criminal conspiracy grounds. And I think it also tried to add attempted abortion into all of the abortion ban statutes. So it already was sort of loaded up with priorities by Ben Clapper and the Louisiana Right to Life, lawyers. So they probably had in their mind the whole time that this was the vehicle that they could use to implement more restrictions and kind of take an end run around what they probably saw was going to be a failed effort to use the Supreme Court to strip, these medications off the market.
They've succeeded with surgical abortion, and look, that's more emotional, and the photos, and they happen later in the term. And I can see they've been kind of like flummoxed with medication abortion because like take pill, it's gone, whatever. And I can see how with the FDA case that these awful lawyers, their brains are wasted on them, have been through every creative way to try to go after the pills. And whether this came up in a national group or they thought of it themselves, whatever. I mean, we know they've been using Louisiana as their breeding ground for these ideas forever. So I think it was probably a little bit of that, and they probably approached Thomas like before we started session. And Thomas is being aggressive and trying to raise his name
profile.
and the hemp bill and all this stuff. So I can see all of that convening as one. But to your point about birth control, that's going to be a tough one because 99% of women use birth control and men don't want it either. But look at what happened with IVF this year. Paula
That's
had, a pretty reasonable bill, got all the way through the Senate, and I don't know exactly what was happening. I probably need to call her and ask what happened, but she decided not to bring it up for concurrence. And, all these people, oh, we're fine with it. We're fine with it. Only the bishops, the Catholic Church was against it. They're always against it. Oh, we're fine with it. We're fine with it. And I was like, I don't know why they're fine with it, because in their calculation, the embryos are people.
no, I mean,
That's
remember
against it.
we have those huge battles for years with Gary Smith because he had his two children through IVF.
Yes.
We passed a variety of bills on surrogacy, literally because it got to a point where you had Christian right legislators who were kind of stuck with this weird hypocrisy of when they'd make their asinine arguments, Gary and his wife Catherine would look at him and be like, you're talking about our damn family, like our kids you've met. And ultimately he passed the bill kind of allowing surrogacy because he shamed the entire legislature into doing it. And the Catholic Church hated it. The Southern Baptists hated it. And the moment Gary wasn't there anymore, I kind of felt like the ability to protect IVF and surrogacy were both going to be problematic. But what's interesting is it all comes back to Louisiana. And just follow me for a second. I'm not trying to Alex Jones it for a second, but just follow me. So Josh Hawley, who is the husband of the terrible lawyer who did the Mr. Bristone case, his number one political advisor is Timmy Teeple, who was the number one political advisor of Bobby Jindal. And I know that because I did an interview in like 2019 because some random reporters in Missouri called me and were like, "Hey, we heard you're the guy I talked to about Timmy Teeple." And I was like, "Who the hell wants to talk about Timmy Teeple anymore?" And to your point, this is all about raising profiles. Like Josh Hawley's wife being the head lawyer in that is literally, in a terrible, like, misogynistic way, about raising Josh Hawley's national profile so he can run president someday. And these kind of culture war, reproductive right issues that they try to like sanitize with different types of language, that was vintage Bobby Jindal. He was awful when it came to reproductive rights. But Timmy always, and the Right to Life, always tried to like say, listen, we're not going after your birth control. We're not really doing these things, as they chipped away at it. And I mean, you look at what happened with Paula's bill. You looked at what happened, and I kind of want to get back into Paula's bill because I find that fascinating how, as to your point, Mandie, no one talked about it because they all assumed it was just going to pass. And everyone was kind of kumbaya on it. And I got to call Paula and talk to her too, because I really don't understand. I think her rationale she gave to the press was it had too many issues where it didn't really protect it. But in the absence of a law protecting it, based upon what's going on nationally, it really does put people who are using IVF treatment in a very gray area right now, based upon what's kind of going on at the federal level.
A few things. Let's see if I can remember all. I do now kind of remember Paula said something like the amendments on the Senate side made it bad, or no point in doing it, or something. We have even more members who have their kids by IVF. I mean, Mike Mellorine, I talked to him about it for a long time. We had Tanner last time. So I kind of wonder how far this could go. But you're right, it's a gray area. I mean, Ellie Schilling and I had done a couple cases on this. Now we all know, everything about our IVF laws, and they're from the 80s, I think. And they're not terrible, but in light of what has passed now, there's language in there that the embryo is a person, a human being. And so that does raise those questions. And IVF doctors have always operated a little queasy here, which is why you ship all the embryos out of state once you do it. I don't know how far they would get on that, because that's a white soccer mom issue, a wealthy person issue, and so is birth control. But these people can push this so that it's only affecting the poor and Black and brown women. Like medication abortion, it's not going to affect women of means as much, because they're just going to fly out of state, or they're going to figure out someone to get them for them. But it's going to affect Black and brown women and these on the ground groups who help people get them because they can't fly out of state. So always hurting the least of these. Michelle, IVF.
Yeah, this was, the intention of the bill was, one, really to deal with like the sort of legal liability issues that arose out of that Alabama case. But because there's so much language in our existing statutes from decades ago that, talks about, fertilized embryos as being human beings, it's difficult to clean up some of that language, because it's in there because the anti-abortion activists wanted that language in there. And so I think that there was a lot more that the IVF medical community wanted, lawyers that work on these issues thought was important. So what Paula had, Rep Davis, let me address her respectfully, but what Rep Davis had proposed was a step in the right direction, but it really wasn't fully resolving some of those issues. But that would have been extremely difficult in this climate. So it was amended on the Senate floor, and I think at that point it made sense to not move the bill forward and just kind of regroup and and work on it, between now and the next session to try to see if, it could be in a better place, or, move it again without that amendment. But I think there was a lot more sort of education among her colleagues that needed to be done on this. And so hopefully there will be more time and a better bill could be put forward next session.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, and that's something I think the public isn't really aware of. There's a lot of bad language in law in this state that is very, very nonsensical, but also very, very, very intentional. I mean, as you recall, when I was carrying that bill, Michelle, for the Humane Society about bestiality, and how we were just trying to clean up the law because after the Supreme Court decision regarding gay marriage, we had invalidated a whole portion of statute that included bestiality law and was making it difficult for district attorneys in parts of the state to prosecute bestiality. So we had language to clean up the law and create a separate bestiality statute. And I had to fight the Family Forum the entire way because they wanted bestiality tied to the sodomy law because they interpret the two as interchangeable. And they were so obsessed, and the same issue when you deal with gay marriage, that the Supreme Court was going to overturn their bad decisions, that they wanted to keep the law wrong because they are convinced it's going to go back to the way it's going to be. And when you look at, like you said, like with Paula trying to fix IVF law or other things like that, like there's bad old 80s and 70s, 80s, 90s law, and it's got very carefully worded, kind of archaic, like really medieval kind of pro-life language. And they don't want to clean that up because they want the law to always fall out in interpretation the way they want it to fall. And by cleaning the language up to make it like common sense apply to the law, it also allows a common sense judge, let's say, for example, the state or federal level, to go, well, no, the legislature didn't intend to mean that if you are a 6-year-old kidnapped, you can be impregnated. And it's like, no. We want to keep that as a gray area because maybe that is what we intended.
So ding, ding, ding. So first, at the end, can you give us a little personal story about the frozen chicken? Because I just would love to hear it directly from you, and because just seeing your face. But ding, ding, ding. I experienced this trying to remove our DOMA, our Defense of Marriage Act, just completely remove it. Wasn't trying to change it from man and woman to two men, just remove it because we have over Geffel. And the committee was, the chair was going to move it out without opposition. Mellarine, a couple other Republican lawyers, they're like, yeah, we should, get this out. This is the law. And then at the very end, this Bible thumper, the faces he was making at me, during the debate, I started to like sweat a little. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a problem. And he says that everyone goes to church and everyone disagrees with this. And I could just see the votes falling. And Mike Johnson almost wanted to involuntary defer. And I said, no, we're going to voluntary defer. They said, we're going to clean it up in the convention, all this. But that's the point. Like, it hit me. They want to keep it in there in case this Trump Supreme Court, probably coming, changes their mind, then it's in there and they can go right back. And it's so creepy because I don't think like that, but that's what they do. And I almost got that to the floor. It was probably the biggest letdown since I've been there. But anyway, I saw it too.
Yeah, it's
taking cutlets later.
Michelle has seen this for years. What's your perspective on the keep the bad law bad?
Oh yeah, it's 100% because they know that they have been working this decades-long strategy to impact the federal judiciary in their favor. So all the bad, all the decisions that are rights-affirming decisions are, potentially up for reconsideration with this court. It's just a matter of getting one of these bills to them. I don't know exactly what their path is, but I think that what makes it really difficult for us, the Lift Louisianas and the, Rep Landrys that are really pushing for, protecting and expanding people's rights, is that we don't think so diabolically. We're not scheming the way that they are. And one of the challenges that we've had is we've brought a couple bills over the last couple of years to fix some of the language in the abortion bans to make it clearer that physicians can can properly treat miscarriages the way that they are trained to treat miscarriages, or that if a physician accidentally commits a treatment for somebody that ends a pregnancy, that they're not criminally liable for that because they didn't specifically intend to end the pregnancy. They intended to treat their cancer patient, right? So, I mean, just common sense, modest proposals that we've brought forward, they refuse to let them out of committee, even though there's broad public support for those things. But they think that if they get to the House floor, then we're going to use those bills as a vehicle to get a rape and incest exception, into the conversation. And it's because they're so evil, they assume we're evil too, and we're not. We're really just trying to save people's lives. And I don't know what the solution is for us and our strategy going forward, because I don't even know if we have the capacity to think so diabolically about our approach to policy.
Well, I mean, when you look nationally, look at what's going on in Arkansas right now, which is they're doing that referendum, or trying to get that referendum on the ballot regarding abortion. And it's one of those things where when I talk to the average person, they're like, we need a referendum on X. And I'm like, we're not a referendum state. And that is very,
person you tried.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting. Right. And I mean, that when you go about diabolical intent, that is like a central issue, because if everyone agrees with you, then why are you afraid of referendums? If everyone hates gay people, if everyone wants everybody to be forced to have babies no matter what, even if it'll kill you, if everyone thinks there should be no exceptions, then why are referendums terrifying? And then you look at Louisiana, look at Arkansas right now, they're going to get their senators to put it on the ballot. And if they put it on the ballot, it's probably going to pass. So when you look at Louisiana and you look at the legislative body, it doesn't really represent what people want, because if you fully are confident that you really represent 51% of all voters, referendums should not terrify you. And in the state, to Representative Landry's point, like, she's tried to do it. I want to say not me, but someone else tried to do it during our time.
David Bitter tried to do it. Mike Foster tried to do it. I think Norby filed it. It's like Jay Darden. This has been going on for decades.
Well, I mean, even when we tried to do our bills regarding the popular vote, which have all died spectacularly every time, like just saying the electoral, like just passing the national popular vote legislation to get rid of the electoral college. Like, to your point, Michelle, we all try to operate with a level of intellectual honesty and say, like, listen, like, part of why I was successful as a legislator was because, like, you try to meet people as people and disagree on policy. And, like, that's how it used to be. Now, to Mandie's point in committee, when you have people who are like, they're opposing your issue on Defense of Marriage Act, that person is not opposing you on policy. They think you're an evil person trying to promote an evil, liberal, red shoes, murdering babies agenda. And it's like, there is no separation from a policy position and a personal position by certain people who interact with the legislature now. And the legislature as a whole, even in my time when I was leaving, you saw the turn. Legislators started to get afraid of their constituents, especially the ones who are the loudest and probably represent a minority of those constituents. They were like, listen, I know the majority of my constituents don't feel this way, but that guy's really loud, and I'm gonna have to hear him yell at me for the next couple of months, next couple of years. And it just, you have to, I always used to feel like everyone kind of operated with some general idea of the greater good guiding them. I just didn't see it this year or in the year before in the legislature. Like, I don't feel like the greater good's winning anymore. I feel like everyone's just kind of reacting to whatever is popular. And I'm going to be honest, I'm really concerned with Paula's bill after the Southern Baptist vote. After
Yeah.
that Southern Baptist convention vote, like even people that like kind of were okay with it, like you saw that Southern Baptist vote, in my opinion, killed that damn bill in the Senate. Like murdered it the next day because everybody who had an aspiration to run for something, everybody who represents a state that's a very heavy Southern Baptist state, they all ran fleeing from that vote. And it's so amazing to me that people, they really just kind of pander to the lowest demographic sometimes. I'm sorry, that was my ramble. I'd love for y'all to respond to that.
So I sort of half agree, but I really think it's the outside interest. Like polling, like Michelle and them did abortion polling, weed polling, polling on everything shows if these people just listen mostly to their constituents, almost all of them would be at least moderate on these issues. It's not constituents, it's the outside groups. And I think it's funny how your average voter thinks it's oil and gas. I'm like, oil and gas, they're like 9 or 10 in terms of influence. It's, the lobbies, all the business groups. When it comes to social groups, Right to Life, Family Forum, NRA, I guess I should say social issues, they get exactly what they want. And they're the ones who go after people brutally. And you have to have 101% right to life record. You cannot have a 99%. And they do exactly as they're told. Press the button, press the button, press the button. And that's what I think is going on is these groups have so much money and so much power. And to a point earlier, also, why are they going after medication abortion and IVF and all that now? They need to keep raising money. They need to continue the grift is what it is. And the power they have over politicians here and elsewhere. And I don't think the average person understands that because I didn't understand that until I was there, that it is crazy voters who are told what to think by these groups who then, walk them off the cliff and then get the elected officials they want. And the power is terrifying. I mean, literally Ben Clapper stands there and just looks at people and they do exactly as they're told. The worst bills.
I mean, you're 100% right. And I'd love to get Michelle's perspective, but like to your point, like a lot of these organizations, especially the big social ones, the NRA is a huge one. I mean, if you look at how much
hateful.
If you look at how much money Wayne LaPierre spent on like mansions and yachts, if he's not making you scared of that guy across the street to go buy 10 guns, he can't buy a mansion and he can't buy cars and he can't live the life he wants. And there is certainly tremendous insight. And I think that's tremendously on point that if you're a cause organization and your cause is a singular cause where it really revolves around inflaming people, if people are not I mean, there's a reason why Alex Jones brought up Sandy Hook and made the crazy statements he made, because the more people drank his Kool-Aid, the more they bought his supplements. Same thing with Clapper and crowd. I mean, once you won abortion, you won Dobbs, you were like, well, that's great, but I got to pay the rent of that building and I got to go pay my staffers. And that's why, I mean, going back to that point I made, like birth control will be the last frontier, Mandie. I hear you. I talked to, it's funny because I've had this conversation with Michelle too, but like, I think there is no bottom to how low they will go. And every time they win an issue, they have to they're like a shark. Sharks, so they stop eating, stop moving, they die. Right to Life always has to have a new thing they're eating.
That's true.
And the only thing, I mean, once you get rid of IVF, once you've banned abortions, once you've taken out misoprostol, what's left? At that point, you're talking about like literally IUDs and birth control. That's the next step. And the problem is that, and this is kind of the fear, like what come the chicken or the egg, at what point do people wake up to realize that's where they have to go next? I mean, at some point when you're that moderate woman, you're that moderate man who feels strongly about these issues, and you go, but I like what they're saying about the economy, like, or crime. And you see it going that far to the right. do you wake up in time before they take your rights away? Because that's really been the question.
I don't think so. I mean, I think there's been some recent polling. I mean, a lot of people really don't think that birth control is under threat at this point, you know. The conversation about the Comstock Act that was brought up during oral arguments in the mifepristone case are pretty illuminating. And then also this session, Rep. Delisha Boyd had a bill that would have just affirmed that people in Louisiana have a right to contraception. And the Louisiana Right to Life absolutely refused to come to the table and say they opposed that bill, but they worked very hard behind the scenes to whip votes against that bill in committee. And there was a lot of back and forth that Rep. Boyd and Ben Clapper had, because, you know, she was like, well, maybe we can sort of accommodate some of the concerns, but every time he brought, you know, well, we're worried about this, and she would say, okay, well, we can fix that this way. It was always something else. And
that's Ben Clapper.
Yeah,
that's Ben Clapper for you. That's his move.
Yeah. So he was not at all interested in, you know, getting that bill out of that committee. That was very, very clear. And, you know, I think continuing to try to negotiate with him was the right thing to do, because at least, you know, there's now a record of him, you know, kind of getting almost everything that he wanted and continuing to push further and further and further, to the point that, you know, I mean, there was the risk of that law making bad law, you know, actually coming out to where fewer people had access to birth control. And, you know, I mean, that's 100% right. But he would not come to the table publicly and say, we oppose this bill. You know, they're sneaky. They're completely sneaky, and they're completely dishonest. I had a funny exchange with him on one of Rep. Newell's bills. I think it was on the one that she was carrying, that, you know, would have said, hey, if your patient has cancer but they're pregnant, and, you know, you can end the pregnancy so you can treat the cancer, you don't have to like wait for 9 months for them, you know, to have carry the pregnancy to term, you know, risking their health continuing to deteriorate, which again is just common sense. And he was, you know, Ben Clapper was trying to negotiate with Rep. Newell, and I kind of inserted myself into the conversation just to see what he was proposing. And, you know, he was saying, oh, well, we just want to make this change and this change. And I was like, well, that just guts the entire bill. You know, you basically leave the bill where nothing changes at all, and you just keep the status quo. And you know, I was like, you know, what about working on this kind of specific intent issue? Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, you know, the committee all said that they're already, you know, they're going to vote against that already. And he said, they told me they were already going to oppose all these bills. And I was like, no, Ben, you told them they were going to oppose the bills. Like, you know, you're not fooling anybody here. You could walk in and sit at that table and tell all of them, actually, we've changed our mind and we want you to vote yes on these bills, and they would sail out of the committee without opposition. And we all know that that's the truth, but, you know.
And honestly, I can say over the years, he's gotten worse. And I only say that because back when I first started and Right to Life was less prominent, they were more collaborative. But as they got more prominent, they didn't have to be anymore. And so suddenly it went from, over time, him like honestly being like, let's have a dialogue. It's become less of, there is no need for a dialogue because I dictate. And I think we look at a lot, like same thing with NRA. NRA has had such a tremendous resurgence. I mean, there's only been a couple of times in recent years where we got a win fighting the NRA. And I mean, a lot of it was just shame and women and children being murdered by like domestic spouses or ex-husbands. Like, it gets to a point where legislators can ignore all the stories of people like my daughter, my son, my child was killed. But for the most part, like just from when I was leaving and when you were coming in, Mandie, like they don't talk anymore. They just go and kill your stuff. They just like they used to like pretend to try and work with you, but now it's just like, no, I got the votes. You go ahead and say whatever the hell you want to say, and we're just gonna kill it. And it's really condescending because they pretend like they care about the dialogue. And of course, they'll send out the shitty emails on you. That's how they raise money. Like they raise money by saying, "Look what we stopped. Mandie Landry almost took away your guns, and she almost let all those Jezebels in New Orleans have lot. You know, give like it. But it's like it's kind of like a weird social experiment dictatorship at this point.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too because for the longest time they really didn't have any opposition. You know, they maybe they were, you know, willing to compromise more because there really wasn't any other outside group that were coming and opposing anything that they were putting forward. And you know, we don't have the votes to win on these issues, but we're making it harder for them. And you know, I've seen, myself, like in the last, I would say 5-6 years, just a notable shift in the Louisiana Right to Life's tactics, responding to the fact that there's actually opposition now. You know, there's legislators that have been elected that are, you know, leading with, you know, within, and more public pressure being put on them from without. I mean, I think Senator Presley's bill is a good example. There's a supermajority in the legislature right now, and still we managed to get 31, you know, House members to vote against that bill, a bill about one of their colleagues. That was every single vote that we could possibly get out of that, out of the House for sure. But we got all of them, and you know, so I think we just need to keep pushing. You know, I mean, we need to change the makeup of the legislature for sure. But I definitely think that bringing that kind of pressure is, you know, is changing their strategy and revealing them to be exactly who they are. And I think it's making it harder and harder for some of the people that they easily got on their side to stay with them because they're being asked to do crazy things. Mandie's going to be more cynical than I am.
Yeah, I mean, we have 32 Democrats and we got 31 votes. Maybe there was one or two, you know, Joe Stagney, you know, our heart. But that was more because of what they did. Although they get some pro-choice. I mean, they get some votes from us on pro-life issues. But they have all the votes. They have all the votes. At most, we get one or two people on our side, and it's disgusting to watch. And I'm getting a lot more forceful about, like, basically, I'm disappointed in y'all. Y'all are full-grown people. But real quick on where's the bottom? There is no bottom. So I've tried 6 times now through various vehicles to get them to confirm that the woman will not face criminal charges for having an abortion or trying to get an abortion. It is sprinkled in various places in law, but the language is a little different. Obviously, if I represented someone, I would say it's clear.
Right.
Sprinkled throughout, the language is a little different. The 2 trigger bans, the language is a little different. I'm like, come on, guys. Alan Seabaugh gave a long sermon, you know, the year of Dobbs, about how we're not criminalizing the woman. And Ben Clapper goes up and says, we don't need this. And they listen to him. And this year, they said, we don't need this. I think my bill was right after Thomas's bill, where Thomas and them were coming up, and Alonzo and others said, isn't this a crime anyway? Yeah, but we just want to confirm it. So there's no floor because they want to arrest women. The year of Dobbs was when the crazy people with the beards and all were up in were in the chamber and in the balcony, and they want to arrest women. That might be their floor, maybe. But what they're also doing is going around this with challenges to the Voting Rights Act, to equal protection issues, to what we saw this week. Right now, it's LGBT issues. then what they're going to say, what they are saying with race in the VRA is, well, basically it is discriminatory to treat people differently because of race, because that's what conservative white people think. And then it's going to be, well, it's discriminatory to make sure women's sports get the same amount of money. So all of those civil rights issues are going to be gutted, and then we're going to be back to where we were in 1950, maybe 55.
I think the 50s was being generous. I think you're more like the 30s at that point. I think the 50s would be. I mean, like, it's interesting to watch.
On everyone.
Well, I know, but the thing is that, and this is like Michelle and I have had this conversation offline numerous occasions, but like, I think that you look at like Kansas, where they recently passed the protection of having an abortion. To the point, that's why I always bring up Ben Clapper and his bullshit position. He's totally against birth control. They're all against birth control. Mm-hmm. The reason why you have to constantly push that is because it's going to happen. And the thing is, because there's no bottom to where they go, part of what I push, and I just talked to Dustin Granger and them at Linda Woodward's like going away party. Like, there is a power in being the party of dissent. That's how Republicans took over Louisiana. They pointed out every single thing Democrats did wrong or did right and blamed us for all of it. And even when we were in the minority, when I was up there, they always found ways to blame on us because they didn't have a super majority. They couldn't do everything they wanted because those damn Democrats. Mm-hmm. There has to be more of a comprehensive effort by Democrats, by groups like Lyft, to work together to say, no, all this bad shit that's happening, it's all them. Because I promise you what happens, Mandie, is that these laws are bad and they're going to lead to bad outcomes. You know, just like women having miscarriages and dying because they can't get treatment. And we have to do what they did for years and go, no, this bad shit that happened, this happened because of you. Because what they relied upon for years is when the bad shit happens, they go, well, no, we didn't know that could happen. Well, the difference is with Lyft up there, you're telling them it's going to happen. You're going, listen, you have in this law, but it's all about messaging to people so that when the bad things happen, they have to own it. Because I'll tell you, in my time, it was always hard to do that because since there was nobody that had clear control of the body. And like, I'll tell you, Bobby Jindal is when Louisiana almost hit rock bottom. Almost. We didn't hit rock bottom because John Bell came in and like propped us up off of hitting rock bottom, whether it be as a party or as a people. We didn't hit rock bottom. I really do feel like in the state that's this kind of going in the wrong direction. You have to hit rock bottom so people can understand who really made the decisions and who really owns the outcomes. Because for the average voter, just in my impression, talking to people, they don't see, well, let me change that. Up until this year, I've had more moderate Republicans approach me and kind of go, what the hell is going on in Baton Rouge? Like, why are things so crazy? I'm like, they've kind of always been this crazy, but they could not, like, remember how, well, you weren't there, Manny, but like Jude B, as Michelle knows, is where Republicans sent all bills that were crazy to die. Like, we were the minority in the Senate, but if they had a crazy misoprostone bill, it ended up in the gambling committee to get killed because they knew, like, oh, wait, that bill's crazy and that's going to end up doing some crazy stuff. And you'd have like moderate Republican presidents of the Senate be like, yeah, that's crazy. If we all have to vote on it, we're all going to vote for it. We'll send it to that bill run by Democrats to murder it. And you don't have that anymore. You didn't have that last term. You definitely don't have it now. Now the crazy bills, all the crazy freak flags are flying and crazy's happening. And when you talk to legislators, and I'm not going to name names because I've served, some of them I still serve with, even to date, when you go, you know, this bill is bad. You and I have both plotted to kill this bill together previously. And now you're voting for it. Like, there really is this effort by a lot of those third-party groups, the sinister ones, to really sell legislators on a lot of these votes are performative. They're not going to have horrific outcomes. And to your point, Mandie, the thing that terrifies them is when the bad outcomes happen to nice, rich people.
Yeah.
When the bad outcomes are happening to poor people, poor black, brown people, they don't care. But what's going to happen is some of these decisions they're making, like when you're talking about misoprostone, when you're talking about doctors not being able to provide proper care, what happens when those rich people die because the doctor says, I'm not going to risk my license to intervene when I should, and I would in any other state? That's the other shoe that's going to fall at some point. It's just, I know sometimes I can honestly say, Mandie, I've never had as bad as you have it. Like the legislature was bad when I was there, but it is not as crazy and bad as it is with you guys have right now. But it's so important y'all continue to fight, because when these things start to go south in ways they can't conceal, and to your point, as long as Black women are dying in emergency rooms from not getting uh prenatal care, they don't care. But when you start going to these rural hospitals where you only have one OBGYN who's not going to risk his license to save that woman who's having a miscarriage, and that woman dies, and suddenly her family is educated on the fact because they start researching that everyone knew this was going to happen, and that legislator and that senator they voted for generations voted to pass something that killed their wife or killed their daughter. Like, that's kind of the level of awful you have to go to for people to wake up. And we're kind of there. I mean, you guys are kind of at the forefront of there. And I mean, because you had the ability, and I'll be very candid because we're candid here. People got to make bad votes in the House for years, and senators would kill it. I mean, Michelle saw it. All the crazy bills. Now there's no Senate to kill it. Well, okay.
A little bit.
A little bit.
Let's give
All right.
a little bit of credit.
I'll give Cameron tremendous credit, which is kind of scary that we're all Cameron is our guiding star right now. But
people's champ, Cameron Henry.
But now that you're seeing them actually do their crazy social reproductive gun shit, like the concealed carry law, that shit is a train wreck waiting to happen.
No law.
And when it happens, because those kind of crazy bills we killed for years, because Democrats unfortunately are in the minority of a minority without being able to block a 2/3 vote. What I'm scared of, honestly, is that we as a party and we as groups still let them blame us for it. Because I feel like part of what I put on Dustin, those people I met with I was like, listen, guys, like, you can also screw this up being the opposition. If you don't do it smart and you don't make people own the bad decisions, and you let them kind of don't, like, just like you do, man, like, you don't put it in their face, you're making this bad decision, you have to own it. If you're not constantly doing that, then when the bad shit happens, they will find a way to blame it on us. So it's so important y'all do what you do, because it creates, like you said, with Ben killing Delicia's bill, you create that record of them fighting to do awful. They can't say it wasn't intentional. I guess I'll get up my soapbox. I'm sorry. Soapbox off to the side.
I think you're being generous because you served with more thoughtful people, per se. I think who we need, and I'm starting to say this very bluntly, is like rich white ladies, like St. Tammany soccer moms. If we could convince them, they could save us from a lot of this. I don't know if we're going to get there. There's no shame. And they're still going to be able to get around some of this, right? I mean, I think, like, for guns, until there is a massive shooting in a Mandeville grade school, probably nothing's going to happen. But in terms of abortion restrictions, that doesn't bother them at all. But that is where it would have to change. Making a record. I don't know how many times I've said that, and Edmund Jordan has said that, and Matt Willard have said it. They get aggravated. Literally, JP, one day, one of the members was aggravated in the criminal session that we were debating. And when I say debating, we were talking and no one was listening. And he looked up and he basically said scoreboard at the voting record, and said he had to go to a Pelicans game after he just trashed New Orleans for 30 minutes. They don't care. They don't like, they say we're repetitive. They don't like the phrasing of certain questions. They don't like certain people. They're aggravated that they have to sit there and listen. But that's what we're doing, is making the record. And especially at the end, I'm like, I'm telling you this, you don't like it, but you can't say later that no one told you about it, because I'm telling you this right now. And there's just kind of a blankness. Last point on the blaming. Trump is doing well because, okay, I'm going to back up. Here's a little mini example of the larger example. Whenever, and y'all are all on Twitter, whatever something happens in New Orleans or someone's trashing New Orleans or, sewage and water board or the roads. Well, New Orleans has been run by Democrats for half a century. We know what they mean. They're talking about Black people. And when you say, why do they blame us and blame us? It's because we're becoming a more majority Black party, because in the House, there's 4 white Democrats and we kind of lost Robbie. And that's what it's going to be. And I don't know how to fix that. Like, I really don't know how to fix that, because it's so easy to demonize us, demonize the party, just like Trump. Everything is immigrants. I mean, how many times have we done that in American history? It's the brown people coming to rape and murder your wives and take all your jobs. So we need to change that messaging. I agree. But I think there's just a lack of shame. And Michelle has probably seen that too, from when you were there to 2024.
Well, I mean, to be clear, you don't ever get to shame them into doing the right thing, with the exception of, like I said, a couple of NRA bills were like, and to your point, it was like rich white women who showed up and were like, this is important. And so the votes, but it's so important that you continue to build the record, because what happens with these guys and these women, say women too, because wow. But when bad things happen to people they know, and they will happen, especially when it comes to gun law, especially when it comes to reproductive rights, where like it's bad outcomes. And they have to look at that person who's not a Black and brown poor person, but is like their person who they know from their private school, who's like a mom who lost her daughter because they didn't intervene on a miscarriage, for example. You making the record, other legislators making the record, lift in committee saying all these things. This is what, I mean, if there's going to be a turn, to your point, it's going to be on y'all making the record. And when the bad things happening, people realizing at some point. And I mean, honestly, if you look historically on when you see a change on an issue, it's pretty similar to this. When the bad outcomes either happen or don't happen, and people have to deal with constituents waking up to it. It's just the challenge in the state is it's so unfortunate we have to go through so much shit to get to a point where people wake up on an issue at all. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, as a parent, it's sort of like when you tell your kid, like, man, I did that thing in high school and it ended really, really, really badly. And then your kid literally does the exact same stupid ass thing and it ends really, really badly. And as a parent, you kind of want to spare them that pain. I look at that as sort of like a generational thing. Like, you look at people from my parents' generation, like, who went through the civil rights movement, who went through all these, you look at people, women who fought for Roe v. Wade and fought to kind of move away from what that was like, and generations of women who do not know what it was like to have to go find an illegal abortion. And everyone tries to spare everyone going back to that. But on the other hand, it becomes a question of like, do we have to go back to that for you to realize what you had and what you gave up? And it's like, it's a horrific thing to say out loud, but that's kind of what's happening in Louisiana right now.
It's money, it's grift, it's power, it's control, it's power over women, it's power over the government is where they're going. And they're getting there.
It's also really rich that they trash New Orleans. Yeah, because we hear this all the time, like, oh, it's just New Orleans people that care about this abortion issue, or, we're going to ignore the nearly 300 doctors and medical students that signed onto this letter because a lot of them were from New Orleans. Well, New Orleans doctors are the ones that are providing pregnancy complication care for the entire state now, because those rural clinics that have the doctors that are worried about losing their licenses, when they've got a pregnant person there that has a serious complication, they're not treating them. They're sending them to New Orleans. The number of transfers from outside of New Orleans is, I mean, it's astonishing. We're hoping to actually get some of that data so we can publish it. But, we're documenting this, and we released this report about how, criminalizing abortion has had a significant impact on pregnancy care, on miscarriages. We sent that report to every single legislator. We held a briefing, and they don't want to hear it. So then we sent people to the committee hearings and had them read sections of the report into the record, because we're like, we need to confront them. You're right. We just have to keep confronting them. You passed this law, and this is directly the impact. People are being taken in to have C-sections because they have a pregnancy complication. Like, this is insanity. And they have to be confronted by that. And we're going to continue to do that, but it's very frustrating because a lot of the committee members will just get up and walk out of the room. They just don't even, not only can they not be shamed, but they won't even listen when people are sitting in front of them saying, this is how what you have done has impacted my life.
I mean,
tell them about your idea for the LDH report.
Oh, my idea?
Your resolution that you gave to me, and we thought this was just going to be perfunctory.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So we were like, okay, so we should do a study resolution and have the department actually have to publish this data, like actually make public what is happening in terms of how pregnancy care has changed dramatically in the state. And they voted against that.
Dodie said we're trying to undermine the pro-life state because I was trying to say that because abortion is illegal. I forget how she worded it, because who knows?
Don't, Dodie. Just
yeah,
don't.
I know.
Yeah, right.
Dodie, yeah, leads to negative outcomes, and then Polly stood up and someone like, you're challenging our pro-life state. I said, literally, we're collecting data. Like, Michelle, you made a list. It was like maternal mortality, infant mortality, early pregnancies, amount on Medicaid, everything that's LDH does, and just collect it in one place. And they're like, no, you're challenging pro-life stuff. They won't even do that.
It's not. If your laws aren't having a negative impact, then why would collecting and publishing this information undermine your laws? Well, what are you scared of?
Remember when Donald Trump made the National Department of Health stop producing gun information regarding gun deaths? Like, all of that, it's crazy, but it's intentional. I mean, they know the outcomes are bad. They just don't want to have people have easy access to that data. Because I know we kind of have to wrap up, because otherwise we're gonna all just be here for like hours, because we could be. I do think it's important to end on some kind of ridiculous stuff that we were talking about. And you wanted chicken stories. What do you specifically want from my Elbert Guillory, Papa Guillory, repeated candidate for lieutenant governor interaction for my chicken stories?
No, Valerie Hodges.
Oh, you're talking about the bestiality thing. Oh, that's even better.
Chicken cutlet or something. Chicken.
So
new to Monet.
Okay,
yeah.
So Monet's going to find this, and just for those who are watching via video,
Monet's going
to get the video, and she's going to slice it in.
The constitutional issues that I fear might be in here is the employment restrictions and the housing restriction. If after they get out of prison, if we have a vegan prison, we're going to send them to, because what about a chicken? A chicken is a dead animal. So I don't know how we're going to fix this. They can't go back and live with their parents in their parents' house if they have a dog. Because it does say a dead animal, and so we can't find them.
Well, the dog example, you're 100% correct in that the person, if their family has a dog, but that being said, there are current, using that same example, a person who's convicted of child molestation and is not allowed to work or operate in a household with children of a certain age. If their parents are watching or custodians of their grandchild, that person can't go back to that household either, and that's been upheld repeatedly as being constitutional and as far as a dead animal that is for consumption is food that is no longer defined.
But it doesn't say that. It just says dead animal.
The way I was reading it is that it only applies to that section where you're only talking about abusing the animal, and as gross as this is, people actually do have sex with dead animals for the purpose of this.
So the reason why the statute says dead or alive is because if a person's having sex with a live animal or a dead animal, it's still bestiality.
We need to clarify.
As far as your other constitutional concern regarding someone having, fried chicken or something like that, that is no longer an animal. It is considered food by definition.
Valerie.
There are plenty of people who, when states started passing child molestation law, restricting people's vocation, saying you cannot interact with children, people brought those challenges saying, well, I'm someone that works in daycares. I should be back in a daycare. And the court said, no, as a condition in the law, since you were convicted of doing this heinous act, you don't get to work in daycare. So if a person is convicted of bestiality and they want to go work at a poultry processing plant, I think the courts can say, sorry, you can't work at a poultry processing plant. Now, also,
But they can't go to Walmart either. If there's
when an animal is packaged for food,
this 3-minute debate is up.
okay.
Okay, can we say asked and answered, Mr. Chairman?
Asked and
There
answered.
you go. Asked and answered.
All right.
Thank you.
So I carried a bill for the United States Humane Society for Animals because there was a question, because Louisiana is crazy, that because we tied bestiality to sodomy, that when they invalidated the sodomy law, DAs in Louisiana had said, since the sodomy law and bestiality were separated by a preposition, both were knocked out and they needed a new statute. So I had the bill in the Senate. Michelle was there because everybody was there. It was kind of hilarious. And 10 senators, to the Ben Clapper, like Gene Mills credit, 10 senators voted against outlawing bestiality because they were told by Right to Life to vote such way. And those 10 senators got so roasted, they all had to turn off their social media accounts because they were internationally being called cow fuckers and everything else you could believe. Like, it was literally, they were begging me saying, you have to pass this bill and you have to amend it so it can come back to the Senate so we can vote for it. So it goes to committee. And this is, mind you, these senators, 10 senators, cut off all their people like, this is a terrible idea. Do not vote against this bill. Here comes Valerie Hodges, like, hold my beer. She decides she's going to debate me on this bill. And she starts giving these asinine examples as to how, like, part of the bestiality thing was that you can't work if you're into bestiality, into because bestiality is psychologically tied to necrophilia. This is tracked by the Humane Society. People who like banging animals like banging dead animals and dead people. So there was language in there being like, people who are involved and convicted of bestiality cannot work in the food preparation industry. And so she was like, well, what are you saying? If like little Jimmy had a problem with some chickens, he shouldn't work in a fried chicken plant. And I said, well, Representative Hodges, since necrophilia is tied to bestiality, I don't want my food coming from little Jimmy in the plant because I don't know what he's going to do with the chickens. And like, Mandie, she had like 7 examples and it kept getting worse and worse. And she kept like, she was like, well, what you're saying is if John can't be around animals, you're making a family choose between their fish and their son. And I was like, I'd hope they'd pick their son over the fish. Like, what do you want me to say to that? And like, she was being fed all of these examples from Gene, the Family Forum, and they were all dumb. And rather than like you could see like Dodie was even like, abort, stop talking. Valerie just kept going. And it was like sitting there and I was like, okay, well, let's talk about this next terrible example you have. And it was like, what, Michelle, like 5-10 minutes of just bad examples of me being like, that's stupid. Like, no, I don't want someone who bangs chicken to be in the frozen chicken plant preparing chicken. And she just kept going. It was like she was reading a script. And it was bizarre.
The best part
Now
really,
she's a senator.
I mean, the best part really was when she said, well, where are we supposed to put people who are accused of this in prison? Because our prisons are farms and we don't have vegan prisons. Do you remember when she said that?
Wait, what?
Yes. She talked about all these prisons have farms on them and she's afraid
they have farm animals. So if they can't be around animals, then there's nowhere to send them to prison because we don't have, she literally said, we don't have vegan prisons.
After they get out of prison, if we have a vegan prison, we're going to send them to.
And I'm sure for her, that was like a zinger from Gene Mills. Let's talk about them liberals. They want vegan prisons too.
Vegan
like,
prison,
it was,
yeah, we
so
got
like,
'em.
but it's just, and it was so bizarre, much like the Clapper thing. The Family Forum like hated this bill, but they kept being like half against it because they knew being against it was crazy stupid. But they also want to make sure their law stayed the same, where sodomy and bestiality were tied together. But like, it was a bizarre situation because it just was bizarre. It was that was probably, other than chicken boxing. And by the way, I'd like to do a shout out right now to Julia Bro, who always gives me these crazy ass bills to pass. She gave me bestiality and she gave me the shit with Elbert Giller we fought over chicken boxing. But like, Humane Society has these innocuous bills that are like, no, cockfighting is bad. It's where like cockfights are where kids get like molested and drugs get sold and stuff. But inevitably, I have crazy people that show up to oppose me doing shit that in any other state would be like, oh, it makes complete sense. But yeah, Monet will splice. For those of you watching the video version of AskJP, we will splice in at the end the exchange I had with Valerie Hodges over why you should be pro bestiality and not anti bestiality. Because really, the argument that she kind of really didn't get in that argument was she was arguing in favor of bestiality. To be clear, she was arguing she does not believe that same sex love is allowed. But if you feel strongly about a cow or a horse, the government should not get in your way. Just to be clear.
That's what farm kids do. That's what farm
kids do. You got to learn somewhere, right? Got to learn somewhere. Anyway, I think that's a great place for us to end because that was a lot less depressing than where we started. So thank y'all so much for being with us today. It has truly been a pleasure. And we will let y'all know when this goes up. But thank you so much for all the work y'all are doing in the legislature, outside the legislature, with education, with everything else, because this is truly one of the most important battles of our lifetime. So thank y'all for being here.